We're continuing in week 2 of this sermon series. Last week we started out, and y'all, if you missed last week, we walked all the way from Genesis chapter 15 to Joshua 1. So we covered like 5 books of the Bible to get a little bit of context and history. We skipped over, obviously, a large portion of that, but we wanted to dive in deep as we look at this theme of being a devoted people. And we have been exploring kind of the exchange between God's promises unto his people and the people's response in their devotion unto God. Again, I'm going to go back. God's promises to his people and how that relates to the people's response unto God via their devotion to his word and his ways. Last week we were in Genesis 15, Abraham, the covenant. God says, hey, I'm going to make you a great nation. Your descendants will outnumber the stars. I'm going to create for you and lead you into a land of Canaan. This will be for your people. They will dwell there and I will be with them. This was the promise. Twofold, land and becoming a nation or having a very large family. This was essential in this day and age. And it's no different than today. You wanted land of your own. You wanted it for your security. You wanted it for your vitality. From the land, you could produce a crop. From the land, your cattle and your herds could graze. That would yield your success and your longevity as a people. You wanted a large family. You wanted many heirs. They would work the land. They would be a part of producing food on the land and tending to the flocks on the land. But they would be a part of defending the land if somebody tried to take it from you. And here, the longing of every person in antiquity was land and a large family. And God says unto Abraham, through you, I will make you a great nation and your people will have this land. We walk through Abraham into Isaac, into Jacob, into Joseph. Joseph being in Potiphar's house, going to prison, rising up, being someone who was in charge of all that was in Egypt. We look at his family coming to dwell in the land of Goshen. We looked at how there was a new king, a new Pharaoh in Egypt that did not remember Joseph and did not know the relationship of the Hebrews and the Egyptians. And that led to all of the boys being killed because Pharaoh saw them as a threat to his power. We saw all of the Hebrew people, they were put in chains and enslaved, and Pharaoh said, they will become my forced labor. I will make them become my servants and slaves. They will work for me. And we saw for almost 400 years, the people existed in slavery and in bondage. If you didn't know this, and you are a Christian, I invite you to dive into the book of Genesis and Exodus and Deuteronomy. If you're visiting with us and maybe the whole Jesus thing is new to you, this is just a little backdrop for where we're going today. The people are crying out. They're in bondage and slavery. Lord, deliver us. You are the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. You promised us we would prosper. You promised us you would be with us, that we would have a great nation, that we would have land to call our own. God hears their cry, and just as all of those baby boys are being killed, he rises up one from that crowd named Moses, who became the deliverer of the people, and God spoke through him. And ultimately, God freed his people from slavery in Egypt, and Moses led them across the Red Sea and into the wilderness, and they make their way to the mountain where God makes a covenant with them. This is a strong thing, a covenant. It's about a relationship. God says, I will be your God, you will be my people. And the people say, yes, we've been waiting for this. Our great-great-great-grandparents have been waiting for this moment in time. And God says, I will lead you to a land flowing with milk and honey. I just need you to obey my law and my word. And the people say, yes, we will obey. We will do whatever you say. But then, as we know, as Moses is up there getting the covenant and the law and the guidance from God, the people grow tired of waiting. And over the course of a few weeks, they're wondering, where has Moses gone? Where has Aaron gone? Where has Joshua gone? Where has Caleb gone? They begin to say, let's make for ourselves a false god. Let's build an idol made out of gold. And they come and they worship the calf. And because of the people not obeying God, because they were not devoted to God, the very one who had just saved them from slavery, the very one that had just freed them from chains, they made this golden calf, which is just a stupid thing to do. And they began to worship it. And God said, because of your sin, because of your lack of devotion, because of your disobedience, you're going to wander in this wilderness for an entire generation until all of the stupidity wears off. And the people who did all of these terrible things will die off. And then the next generation I will lead into the promised land. I tell you this, and sometimes the Old Testament confuses us, the law. And why did God have a law? And what did that law mean? And what does it mean today? And I've used this analogy before, and if I've done this with you, I apologize. I'm getting to the age where I can't remember if I've told a certain story or not. Does anybody else find themselves there? Amen? You get to that place? But I do want to share. 15, 16 years old, the most important thing in my life was getting my driver's license. I had seen the class above me get to drive. I had heard the boom from the amplifiers as they would pass my home. I had heard their dual exhaust. I had seen the tint on their windows. I could not wait to have my own vehicle because that meant for me, I was liberated from my home. I would have the ability to travel. My little neighborhood of Bellevue by the airport in Gulfport, I would cruise the streets. I would make my way down Courthouse Road to here, the ladies would be in abundance. It would be a beautiful home for me to exist in. And all of that was anchored around having a vehicle. This was the longing of my heart. And the promise of my parents was this bad boy you're going to see on the screen. That was my ride. That was my 1984 Mazda B2000 pickup truck. It did not look nearly as clean as this one does. That was my everything. You don't see many of those in Cruising the Coast these days, but it was awesome. It had a system in it. It kind of boomed a little bit louder than it should. Man, I wasted so much money on that dumb stuff. But this was my thing. And when I got 15, I got my license and I got this bad boy. I think it was 85,000 miles on a rebuilt engine. It was a 5-speed. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. I think we paid $1,200 for that back in 1996. It probably costs more than that today for the same truck. But here was the deal. Those keys came with devotion because I had to be devoted to what my parents wanted me to be when I was behind the wheel. They had discipled me for over a year, training me in how to drive like they drove, training me in how to obey the laws of the land, training me in how to be defensive and be alert, training me in what the different signals meant and how to drive if the pavement got wet or if it was rainy or if it was foggy, not to use the high beams, all of those different things. They had trained me. Why did they give me all of those guidelines? Why did I have those rules? Why did I have that law? It felt like it was boxing me in, but now knowing why they did it, because they loved me, because they wanted me to be successful, because they wanted me to be safe and to be protected, because they didn't want me to cause an accident or to find myself getting in trouble. Why did they want me to obey the laws of the land? So that I would not be reckless. They did it because I was their most prized creation. And they were letting me begin this new adventure of life, but they were putting these safe guardrails around me to ensure that I would thrive and that I would honor them and that I would grow and that things would be the way they were supposed to be. It didn't make a lot of sense to me at 16. Why did I have to be home at 9 o'clock? But now I see they did it out of love to guide me in the right direction. If you've ever struggled with the Old Testament and the law, very similar. My analogy definitely falls short and you can definitely poke holes in it. But we see in the same way, that's why God is giving this law unto his people, so that they can be who God desires them to be. Because God knows their weakness, he knows their distractions, he knows the ways of their flesh. And in the law, everything we find written in Deuteronomy and parts of Numbers and Leviticus, God is defining what it means to be his people. In the way that we interact with one another, the way that we love our children, the way that we treat our parents, the way that we care for the orphans and the widows, the way that we treat the poor, the way that we interact with people we disagree with, all of it is in the law. The way that we worship and honor our God. We love him with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. The way that we care for others and the way that we wish to be treated, all of that is a part of the law. And God was giving them the law to set them apart, so that they wouldn't be like the other people, so that they wouldn't be like the other kingdoms. And God had set them apart so the other people would look at them and say, wow, look at the way they treat one another. Look at the way they exist with joy and worship in their hearts. We want to know what they know. We want to worship what they worship. We want to treat one another the way that they treat one another. God was setting the nation of Israel to be an example to all the nations of the world. And we see as they're preparing to go into this promised land, God calls them together. And Moses speaks to him one more time, and he reiterates. And if you've ever had your parents do this before, maybe a big trip, or maybe you're going out of town, or maybe some seniors getting ready for that spring break trip, and parents sit you down and are like, just one more time. We know you're going to be in college next year, but we want to lay out the law so that you behave in a way that represents our house, that you behave in a way that represents the Lord. And here Moses speaks to them before they move into the promised land, and he says, look, God is going to give you this land. They could see it, y'all. It was across the water. They could see it on the other side of the Jordan River. Your great-great-great-great-grandparents have been dreaming about this day. You are about to enter into all that has been promised to you, way back to Isaac and Jacob and Abraham. As you do, know that God is with you. God will hand this land over to you, that you will deal with the people the way the Lord commands you to. And the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. God will neither fail you, nor will he abandon you. And the people are like, yes, this is awesome. We're about to walk across the river. We're about to begin this journey. We will have our land. We will have our herds. We will have our flocks. We will plant our crops. We will have multiple children and sons and daughters, and they will grow, and we will become a prosperous nation, and God will be with us. And the people, this is great, this is awesome. But then Moses follows it up and he says, but in light of all this promise, this is the exchange between the promises of God and the devotion of the people. Moses says, you gather as an assembly, and you review this law, this covenant. You read these instructions, this guidance. Whenever you come together, you read it word for word. You have to learn to fear the Lord. Fear is not being scared of something. Fear is revering and honoring and being in awe of. You have to learn to fear the Lord, to obey all the terms of these instructions. You need to teach them to your children so they will learn to revere the Lord as well. And then Moses says, guys, I know you're thrilled. I know you're excited to start this new adventure. You have been longing for this. But you need to know these instructions are not empty words. They are your life. And if you obey them, you will enjoy a long life in the land that you are about to occupy when you cross the Jordan River. And they begin making their way. And again, I'm summarizing a lot of meat in the story because a couple points we want to make today. But they make their way across the Jordan River. It literally stops flowing. They gather stones from the bottom of this. You can read this. This is in Joshua 1-6. They gather stones and they set them up on the shore. They pile them up it's called an Ebenezer. It's a memorial, remembering that God had delivered them from Egypt, that God had led them through the wilderness, and that now God was leading them into the promise that he had made to their ancestors. They were remembering that God is faithful. They go in, and the first community, the first little city, little town, little kingdom that they're going to conquer is called Jericho. And there's this whole deal where they end up conquering Jericho, and they circle around it. They blow some trumpets. There's a little battle that goes on, and God does as God said he would do. He goes ahead and he leads them to victory. He leads them to victory, but he adds this. He says this: as you go on, as you conquer these kingdoms, do not take any of the things set apart for destruction, or you yourself will be completely destroyed. If you take them, you will bring trouble upon the camp of Israel. And just like when I went out driving, and my mom and dad said, don't drive the way that they drive, and don't drive the way that your buddies drive. You drive the way that I taught you to drive, because it's the correct and the safe way to drive. If you do what your buddy who's 16 does, you're probably gonna don't let him be the one who's showing you what to do behind the wheel because he's never done it. Don't pay attention to the way this person does it because they've had multiple tickets and DUIs and they've been in wrecks. I want you to drive in a way that is going to lead to your wholeness and to your safety. And as the people enter in, God is saying, you're going to see things over here and over there that you're going to want to collect, but those aren't for you. If you take them, you will ultimately begin to make them your master. You will fall victim to the ways of the world. You will begin to worship them. So God says, destroy it all. Don't even let it be a temptation. Eradicate it. Take it out of your mind and of your heart. Burn it. Remember, burn the wardrobe, burn it so that it cannot be a temptation unto you. And then God says this: when you find silver When you find gold, when you find bronze, when you find iron, these were very much precious metals, just as they remain precious today. Many of you ladies who are married are wearing gold right now. In fact, I think gold is probably at an all-time high per ounce as to what it cost. It was precious thousands of years ago. God says unto them, when you find these things, these precious metals, they are sacred unto the Lord, and they must be brought into his treasury. Well, Scripture says that Joshua led the people in. They did these things. Jericho became their own. They destroyed it. The reputation of the Israelites begins to grow. The people are hearing about how strong they are. They're hearing about how powerful their God is, how great a leader Joshua is. All of the land which they're trying to conquest, the kingdoms are beginning to tremble with fear that the Israelites are coming. God has made the promise unto them that this will eventually be their land, and they begin to seize up. What's the next opportunity? Where's the next place that we're going? And they find it. It's this city called Ai, and they see it. And just to put this in context, it's kind of a smaller place. It's an easy conquest. And Joshua brings all of his commanders together and he's like, look, we don't need to send the best. Let's just send a couple out. This is going to be a routine. God is with us. We'll take care of it. It's kind of like University of Alabama playing under Saban, and they're playing against Belhaven University. Okay, that's an easy one. You can send in the practice squad. No offense if you went to Belhaven, but that's an easy victory, right? I mean, that's just paying out the money to get the W. And Joshua sees this small community and says, we can send the C team. This isn't going to be a big deal. And they send the C team, and Belhaven absolutely destroys them. It annihilates the army, starts killing off the Israelites. And Joshua and all the commanders come together and like, what's going on? God, what have you done? You promised us that you would be with us. You promised us that you would give us this territory. You promised us this promised land would become our own. And all of the Israelites, it says in chapter 7, they're paralyzed with fear at this turn of events. Their courage begins to melt away. Joshua, all the preachers and the elders and all the important people, they begin to rip their clothing, which was a way of showing despair. They rub dirt upon their heads. They bowed their face down and they cried out, God, why have you forsaken us? You promised this to our ancestors. We saw the strength of your hand as we conquered Jericho. Why against this little foe have you called us to fail? Why against this little community have you allowed them to destroy your great army of your people? And this was the deal. And this is where we wrap today. As the people had received the word, as they had received the commandments of God, of what God expected their devotion to look like, there was one family that as they went through Jericho, they went into a home and they saw gold and silver and bronze and beautiful shiny things. And knowing that God had said, those are mine, those go into my treasury. Instead, they stole them and they brought them back to their tent and they literally dug a hole under their cots and they hid the gold and they hid the silver and they hid all of the precious metals. And then they began to lie about the fact that they had done it. But here's the deal, church. God knows the ways of our hearts. God knows the struggles that we have. God knows the temptations that we face. And as God calls us to be his own, God calls us to be an obedient people. And that means listening to God's law. It means listening to God's guidance. And it's not that God's trying to box us in. It's that God's trying to free us for joyful obedience. In this one family, because they had rejected God's ways and because of their selfishness and their lack of will to honor God, we see that God brought forth destruction because they were an disobedient people. And we see that the promises that God had made to this family were never fully realized because they were unwilling to trust in their Heavenly Father, because they were unwilling to love the Lord their God with their heart, mind, soul, and strength. strength. They were unwilling to love their neighbor as themselves. They were unwilling to part with what they had saw. The shiny things of the world had distracted them. And as we've said time and time again, God didn't want them to have that because he knew that ultimately they would begin to worship it. So what they did, this one particular family, they traded being slaves to Egypt, being slaves to Pharaoh, and now they were slaves to the very material possessions that they had stored in their tent. They were unwilling to allow God to free them from the things of this world that would prevent them from being all that God desires them to be. And we're gathered in this space today, and I know some of you, I'm preaching to the choir, but some of us are slaves to those same things. We're slaves to those precious metals. We're slaves to those shiny things. And look, I wholeheartedly believe we work as hard as we can. We earn as much as we can. We save as much as we can, but we're also called to be a people who give away as much as we can. And in this conquest, we see that God has built in the first fruits, that it was to be given unto the Lord as a way of honoring the Lord. That the people were to learn to all of this as God's to begin with. We are simply stewards of all that we will ever make, all that we will ever earn, all that we will ever save. And God is trying to teach the young Israelite nation that he will bless them and that he will go ahead of them, but they are called to be a people who are devoted unto him. In church, we struggle. We struggle in these same areas. In some ways, we are no different than that one family who saw those shiny gold bars. You can read about it, Joshua chapter 7 and 8. And you digging a hole under your bed, trying to sit on that without acknowledging that it's all God's to begin with. We're going to continue in this story for the next couple of weeks, and we're going to talk about stewardship. And I want to talk about this with you because this is a part of your discipleship. I want to talk about with you because for some of us, this is preventing us from holiness. I want to share, last week, a couple weeks ago, I had a meal, and Ben can come on back up. I had a meal with one of our members, and that members, we were talking about finances, we were talking about, the next generation, we were talking about generosity. And hey, I'm just gonna be honest with you, look at me. If you haven't been listening to anything I say, generosity doesn't come easy to me. That has been a work of the Holy Spirit within me. That is not something, it's not my default. And if that bothers you, I'm just being real with you, it's not my default. And it may not be your default either. Know that we're one another's people, okay? But I have been transformed by the grace of God, chipping away at my calloused heart. But as I'm visiting with this individual, we were talking about generosity, and this is an individual who goes above and beyond every year. I mean, they are just the definition of generosity. And I said to him, look, I need you to know, this intuitively comes out of you. This is just who you are. And that is a beautiful spiritual gift. Like, thank you for the way that God has wired your heart and that you're not trying to store this up under your bed, but you recognize God has blessed you and too much has been given, much will be, required. And to know that you so effortlessly part with this stuff, I'm in awe of it because I struggle with that. And I said, man, I just want to let you know, dude, you and your family, y'all are an inspiration to me. Y'all make me want to be even more generous. Because you recognize that the freedom, the joyful obedience of honoring your God is a beautiful thing when you allow the chains that strap us down to wealth and finances to be snapped. And when you allow those shackles to come off and you begin to see all that you have from the perspective that God desires you to see it from. You see, we see it through a filter that sometimes is just clouded in selfishness. But as God was leading his people in the conquest, he wanted them to see the land and the herds and the crops and the treasure. He wanted to see it from his holiness, not from their worldliness. And that's where you and I struggle as we look at what we make and what we earn and what we store and what we invest. We look at it from a worldly perspective that says me, I, and mine. But when we allow the Spirit to free us from that captivity and our eyes are open to see it through the lens of God's holiness, we see it that it's all God's to begin with. that we're simply stewards of it, and that God is not calling us to go without. He's calling us to honor him with our first fruits. And until we surrender, until we submit, that filter will always hang upon us. And we may catch glimpses of the promised land from time to time, but we're not living in it because we're bound and slaves to something else. So as this journey continues, and as I look out, I don't have my glasses on, but I know where some of you guys sit. Some of you are the epitome of generosity, and I praise God for you. You inspire me. And some of us this morning, we're mimicking that family that saw those shiny things, and we've latched onto them, and we're hiding them under the bed, and we're unwilling to let go. Why? Because we're unwilling to trust God. That's the only answer. Selfishness is a direct result of a heart's unwillingness to trust God.